Hey there, ready for some freaking history? Good, because that's the thing I do. I do history. Hard and fast, baby. Well, sometimes. I guess it depends. Anyway, subscribe if you like history, and let's get going with today's topic. In the winter of 897, in the city of Rome, a trial convened under vaulted ceilings and flickering lamps. The defendant was dressed in papal vestments and seated on a throne. He did not speak. He could not. He had been dead for months. This is the story of the Cadaver Synod, Synodus Horrenda, when a living pope placed his predecessor's corpse on trial. It is a tale about power in an age of uncertainty, about law stretched to its breaking point, and about the long shadow of factional politics over the medieval church. Let's rewind. In the late 9th century, Italy was a chessboard of rival houses and brittle thrones. The Frankish imperial project of Charlemagne had splintered into competing kingdoms. In central Italy, the papacy sat both spiritually elevated and physically vulnerable, tugged between local magnates and distant kings. Among the strongest of those local players was the House of Spoleto, Duke Guy III, his son Lambert, and Lambert's mother Agiltrude, whose ambitions reached from the Apennines toward the Keys of St. Peter. Into this world stepped a churchman named Formosus. He had served as Bishop of Porto, an important suburbicarian see near Rome. His career was checkered. At one point, he was excommunicated amid political storms and later reconciled. But he was also respected, capable, and connected. In 891, after a turbulent conclave, he was elected Pope Formosus. Formosus inherited a papacy hemmed in by the Spoletans and overshadowed by the contest for the imperial title. He made a choice that would define his legacy. He backed the East Frankish king Arnulf of Carinthia as the best hope to stabilize Italy and to counter Spoletan pressure on Rome. It was a gamble wrapped in theology and canon law. Popes crowned emperors, and emperors at their best protected popes. But beneath the liturgy was hard politics. In 894 and 895, Formosus invited Arnulf to intervene. The campaigns were grueling. Still, in early 896, Arnulf pushed through to Rome. On a February day, Formosus placed the imperial crown on Arnulf's head, declaring him Holy Roman Emperor. For a moment, it seemed the balance had shifted, but fortune didn't hold. Arnulf soon fell ill, paralysis, according to some accounts, and withdrew north. The protector was gone. The enemies remained. 2 months later, in April 896, Formosus died. What followed reads like a series of aftershocks. Boniface VI, a compromise figure, held the papal throne for barely half a month. Then came Stephen VI, sometimes numbered Stephen VII, whose sympathies lay closer to the Spoletans. His election took place in a Rome still raw from invasion and counter-invasion, full of clergy whose careers rose or fell depending on which emperor the Pope had favored. The factions wanted not only victory, but vindication, and some wanted revenge. Sometime in late 896 or early 897, Stephen's circle prepared a move that was at once theatrical and terrifying. They would haul Formosus back into public life, literally, and unmake him before the eyes of Rome. In January 897, a synod was convened at the Lateran. The body of Formosus was exhumed from its grave, dressed again in the white and gold of papal office, and seated on a chair as though presiding. To give the corpse a voice, the court appointed a deacon to answer in his name. Then the charges were read. The prosecution accused Formosus of perjury, of violating canon law by translation, that is, by moving unlawfully from the bishopric of Porto to the See of Rome, and of usurping an office he was barred from holding. On paper, these were technical questions. In reality, they were a weapon aimed at the heart of his pontificate. If Formosus's election was invalid, then so were his acts, his ordinations, his judgments, his very crowning of Arnulf. Erase Formosus, and you rewrote years of history in favor of his enemies. The trial's tone, as later chroniclers tell it, swung from macabre to furious. Pope Stephen, in full authority, interrogated his predecessor's remains through the deacons' staged replies. At the end, the synod pronounced its verdict. Formosus was condemned. His papal acts were annulled. The ritual knife was turned to ritual mutilation. 3 fingers of the right hand, the fingers used to bless, were cut from the corpse. The body was stripped of the vestments of office. First buried in a common grave, it was then dug up once more and dragged to the Tiber, where it was thrown into the river's dark water. The symbolism could not have been clearer. This was damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, enacted with chilling literalness. It tried to reverse a pontificate and erase a political choice. But power rarely speaks the last word in one breath. Rome reacted. Anger and fear simmered into open unrest. The spectacle that was meant to terrify instead shocked consciences. Many clergy had been ordained by Formosus. Did the synod mean their priesthoods were void? Were sacraments invalid? The logic of the verdict threatened to unravel daily religious life. And for ordinary Romans, the desecration of a pope's corpse crossed a line that factional polemics could not justify. By mid to late 897, Stephen's fortunes had reversed. He was deposed, imprisoned, and according to consistent reports, strangled in his cell. The pendulum had swung back. What followed was a rapid effort to repair both law and memory. At the end of 897, a new pope, Theodore II, though reigning only about 20 days, called a synod that annulled the Cadaver Synod's verdict. Formosus's body, said to have come ashore from the Tiber, as some told it, was recovered and reburied in St. Peter's with honor. More than gesture, this was a legal reset. Formosus's acts and ordinations were restored. In 898, Pope John IX went further. He convened councils in Rome and Ravenna to confirm Theodore's reversals. The councils forbade trials of the dead and reaffirmed the validity of orders conferred by Formosus. They tried to bottle the chaos, to say in law what common sense already shouted: you cannot govern a church or a city by dragging corpses into court. For a time, the scandal seemed settled. But history is never a straight line. In 904, a new pope, Sergius III, climbed to the throne with Spoletan backing and revived the condemnation of Formosus, if not as a juridical reality, then as a political statement. Sergius's stance kept the wound open, and later writers remembered his pontificate as part of a grim season, sometimes nicknamed the Iron Age of the papacy, when noble families and their militias made and unmade popes with disquieting ease. Even so, the practical church moved on. Priests ordained by Formosus continued to minister. Bishops consecrated by him were not universally deposed. The logic of daily faith pressed against the logic of faction, and in the long view, practice favored continuity over erasure. What then are we to make of the Cadaver Synod? First, it reveals the fragility of institutions when legal debates are weaponized by political factions. The charge about translation, that a bishop should not seek a higher see, was not invented to destroy Formosus. It was part of existing canon law. But in the synod's hands, a prudential rule became an instrument to rewrite recent history. The law stood in the dock alongside the corpse. Second, it exposes the peril of trying to purify the past by decree. If you void a pope's acts, you do not merely condemn a rival. You imperil sacraments, ordinations, and the public's trust in the stability of religious life. The Romans who rose against Stephen were not canonists. They were citizens who understood that some lines, once crossed, invite permanent disorder. Third, it reminds us that memory can be contested yet resilient. The Spoletan faction tried to bury Formosus twice, in a grave and in public memory. His defenders retrieved him twice, from the riverbank and from legal oblivion. Over the next century, he neither became a sainted martyr nor vanished as a villain. He endured as a cautionary figure, and the synod that tried to erase him survived as a warning. We should also resist the temptation to see only grotesquerie. Yes, the image of a cadaver enthroned is unforgettable. But the scandal's heart is not the macabre stagecraft. It is the political fear that made such theater seem useful. Popes and emperors once mirrored each other's claims to universal order. When that mirror cracked, men tried to piece it together with trials and anathemas. The Cadaver Synod is what happens when fear tries to rule through ceremony. By the close of the 10th century, the papacy would begin a slow reform that sought to insulate ecclesiastical elections from local warlords and to clarify the lines between spiritual authority and temporal power. Those reforms were decades away in 897, but the memory of the synod lingered as a signpost set by error. Do not come this way again. Thanks for watching. We release a new one of these babies every Friday, so be sure to subscribe if you want to hear, see, and learn more about the stories that made us. See you next week.